Seth Speaks, The Eternal Validity of the Soul by Jane Roberts, read by Martin John, final chapter 22. Session 589, August 4, 1971, 9:04 p.m. Wednesday. We will continue. There are kinds of consciousness that cannot be deciphered in physical terms. The personality who originated the paragraphs you have just read is such a one. As mentioned, there is the same kind of connection between that personality and myself as the one that exists between Rupert and myself. But in your terms, Seth too is far further divorced from my reality than I am from Rupert's. You can imagine Seth too as a future portion of me if you prefer, and yet far more is involved. I am myself using simple terms here to try and make these ideas clearer. In a trance state, Rupert can contact me. In a state in some ways similar to a trance, I can contact Seth too. We are related in ways quite difficult to explain, united in webs of consciousness. My reality includes, then, not only reincarnational identities, but also other gestalts of being that do not necessarily have any physical connections. The same applies to each reader of this book. The soul is open-ended, therefore. It is not a closed spiritual or psychic system. I've tried to show you that the soul is not a separate, apart from you thing. It is no more divorced from you than God is, and God is in capital. There is no need to create a separate God who exists outside of your universe and separate from it, nor is there any need to think of a soul as some distant entity. God, or all that is intimately a part of you. His energy forms your identity, and your soul is a part of you in the same manner. My own reincarnational personalities, probable selves, and even Seth too, exist within me now, as I exist within them. In your terms, Seth too is more advanced. In your terms, he is more alien, since he cannot relate to your physical existence as well as I do because of my background in it. Still, my experiences enriches Seth too, and his experiences enrich me to the extent that I am able to perceive and translate them for my own use. In the same way, Rupert's personality is expanded through relationship with me, and I also gain through the experience, as even the best of teachers learn from each dimension of activity. In larger terms, my soul includes my reincarnational personalities, Seth too, and probable selves. I am as aware of my probable selves, incidentally, as I am of my reincarnational existences. Your concept of the soul is simply so limited. I'm not really speaking in terms of group souls, though this interpretation can also be made. Each part of the soul contains the whole, a concept I am sure will startle you. As you become more aware of your own subjective reality, you will therefore become familiar with greater portions of your own soul. When you think of the soul as a closed system, you perceive it as such, and close off from yourself the knowledge of its greater creativity and characteristics. Seth too does represent what I will become to some extent. And in your terms, yet when I become what he is, he will be something different. In the same terms now only, Rupert may become what I am, but then I will be something different. Each of you are involved in the same kind of relationships, whether or not you are aware of them. Though it seems to you that reincarnational existences involve past and future events, they are existences parallel or adjacent to your own present life and consciousness. Other aspects of your greater identity exist, relatively speaking, about or around these. The answers to the nature of reality, the intimate knowledge of all that is that you all seek, is within your present experience. It will not be found outside of yourselves, but through an inner journey into yourself, through yourself, and through the world that you know. Give us a moment. I was once a mother with 12 children, ignorant in terms of education, far from beautiful, particularly in later years, with a wild temper and raucous voice. This was around Jerusalem in the 6th century. The children had many fathers. I did my best to provide for them. My name was Marshaba. We lived wherever we could, squatting in doorways and, finally, all begging. Yet in that existence, physical life had a contrast, a sharpness greater than any I had known. A crust of bread was far more delicious to me than any piece of cake, however well frosted, and ever been in any lives before. When my children laughed, I was overwhelmed with delight, and despite our privations, each morning was a triumphant surprise that we had not died in our sleep, that we had not succumbed to starvation. I chose that life deliberately, as each of you choose each of yours, and I did so because of my previous lives had left me too blasé. I was too cushioned. I no longer focused with clarity upon the truly spectacular physical delights and experiences that earth can provide. Though I yelled at my children and screamed sometimes in rage against the elements, I was struck through with the magnificence of existence and learned more about true spirituality than I ever did as a monk. This does not mean that poverty leads to truth, or that suffering is good for the soul. Many who shared those conditions with me learned little. It does mean that each of you choose those life conditions that you have for your own purpose, knowing ahead of time where your weaknesses and strengths lie. The gestalt of my personality, in your terms, I lived later, richer lives. That woman was alive again in me as, for example, the child is alive in the adult, and filled with gratitude comparing later circumstances to the earlier existences. She urged me to use my advantages better. So in you, your various reincarnational existences in a large manner co-occur. Using the analogy of adulthood again, it is as if the child within you is a part of your own memory and experience, and yet in another way has left you, gone apart from you, as if you are only one adult that the child turned into. So the people that I have been have gone their own way, and yet are part of me and I of them. I am alive in SETH II's memory as a self from which he sprang. Yet the self I am now is not the self from which he sprang. Only your rigid ideas of time and consciousness make these statements seem strange to you. For in a larger context, again, I can remember SETH II. All of those connections, therefore, are open. All psychological events affect all others. You may take your break. referring to an ESP class session. In that session, for May 4, 1971, Seth said in part, "So what you understand of reincarnation and of the time terms involved is a very simplified tale indeed. Reincarnation, in its own way, is also a parable. It seems very difficult for you to understand that you live in many realities and many centuries at one time. All of existence and consciousness is interwoven. Only when you think of the soul as something different, separate, and therefore closed, are you led to consider a separate God, a personality that seems to be apart from creation. All that is a part of creation, but more than what creation is. There are pyramid gestalts of being impossible to describe, whose awareness includes knowledge and experience of what would seem to be to you a vast number of other realities. In the terms of which I am speaking for your benefit, their present might, for example, include the life and death of your planet in a moment of their time. Seth's existence is at the outside fringes of one such galaxy of consciousness. When Seth 2 speaks, Rupert initially is aware of the following. His consciousness strains upward, following an inner psychic pathway, an energized funnel, until quite simply it can go no further. It seems to him then that his consciousness goes out of his body through an invisible pyramid whose open top stretches far up into space. Here he seems to make contact with impersonal symbols whose message is somehow automatically translated into words. That point actually represents a warp in dimensions, a place between systems that has far more to do with energy and psychological reality than it has to do with space, for space is meaningless. I am almost always present as a translator at such times. My knowledge of both realities is necessary for the communication. Seth 2 is familiar with an entirely different set of symbols and meanings, so that, in this case, 2 translations are being given, one by me and one by Rupert. Hopefully, certain concepts will be delivered in this way that could not be delivered otherwise. This minglings of reality and experience, these messages from one system to another, occur in various ways continually, emerging in your world in one guise or another, as inspiration of many kinds. You are being helped, in other words. You are also using your own abilities, however, for your own characteristics largely determine the amount of help you receive. The symbolism apparent to Rupert when Seth 2 speaks works well, but outward is also inward, and so consciousness travels as far inward as it seems to him to go outward. Such contacts and knowledge are available to each individual. All that is speaks to all of its parts, not with sounds, trumpets, and fanfare from without, but communicates its messages through the living soul stuff of each consciousness. End session. Peace, light, and love. Aloha.